Hey, good morning. It's Thursday, February 18th. Thank you for being here this morning. Everyday thought today is about God appearing or seeming to be distant. And we hear a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of books about this, about how to get closer to God. Uh, how can you pray more? How can you involve in various types of spiritual discipline exercises? And again, all those things have a valid place. But God has left himself a testimony in his word about himself that reminds us constantly that he's always with us. He's always near. Just because I don't recognize it or acknowledge it doesn't mean that he's not here. So the reason for my book, Everyday Talk, is to acknowledge that fact that we're always talking in the presence of God. That's why the words you use every day in those unplanned moments are so significant in shaping your worldview and your children's. And if we look at the life of Jesus, we see that he lived out what Moses said about way back in Deuteronomy. When you rise up, when you sit down, when you walk along the way, when you take a nap, when it's mealtime, those are the times to talk and deal with God. Because he's not real. He's not part of my life. And then you look at Jesus' life and you see he talks about foxes and holes in the ground and treasure and leaves falling and birds falling to the ground and crops and business. And yes, even manure piles. He talks about bright lights. He talks about soldiers. He talks about government. He talks about everything that we encounter. And just to underscore that a little bit, I just went out in my garden, picked some spots where it wasn't real rainy, and just dragged a couple things in here and brought them out for you to look at. Okay? What is this? It's a leaf. It's left over from fall. It hasn't fully composted yet into the ground. But what does God have to do with this leaf? Well, he makes the seasons. The reason we had this leaf would have been a few months ago a really bright color. It would have been attractive and mind-blowing. Before that, it would have been a bright green. And before that, this leaf would have sprung from right here as a little tiny bud that grew into something which became green, which became this bright color, which became brown, and is getting ready to decompose back into the ground again. Here's another little example of the same thing. God is involved in these things. It's what he does. We talk about color. Well, color just isn't restricted to the fall. Found this guy out there. Got still some moisture on it from the rain that was happening. This is God being faithful in the seasons, giving us things to delight in. Even in the color. Why is it color? We can talk about light. There's light reflecting from the overhead in my living room here. I'm holding it up. You're seeing it through the camera. The camera's processing and balancing it in such a way, trying to give us a natural color light. And God does all these things to remind us of his beauty. He doesn't have to do that. But let's get a little more mundane, all right? Right here. Look what I've got. Got some soil. Some of it's some wood. That's also decomposing. But I've also got some regular dirt. Okay, what's exciting about dirt? Well, what does Jesus do with dirt? He builds a whole analogy about the church and the different kinds of soil. Is it rocky soil? Is it soil that's filled with stuff that is not good for growing? Or is it stuff that really is going to produce a good crop and decompose? And this is, you can see the dirt that's here. It's got several years of just stuff in it, and it's getting richer and richer, and it's going to produce more beautiful flowers like this in a few weeks' time. God is involved in all of this. He wants us to see this. These things are not random. If we can find this much here where Jesus uses this to talk about, uses the leaves of the trees to talk about whether or not a tree is doing well, whether it should be cast in the fire or not. If he can talk about this type of dirt as a basis of understanding whether or not you've got a good church and does it produce good fruit, we need to be talking about God all the time because he is there all the time. All these things in this little bowl that I just handed out to you to show you, they're evidences of God at work right now. Tonight we're going to talk about the evidences of God at work in our relationships. It's just as practical and just as much as down to earth and sometimes just as dirty as this is. That's what God wants us to be about. The problem is not that God is distant. The problem is that we don't believe him for what he says he is, because he's here. He's always with us. And it's always a good thing to praise and acknowledge that. Think about that this day. Rethink about God. Let that show in your everyday talk. And that's the thought for the day. And Lord willing, we'll see you tonight. Have a great day. Bye-bye.